there were all these messages that we were hearing from reporters who were there, and they were exhausted, and their exhaustion suggested that, okay, the talks are going to end up in a failure. Somebody's going to quit. Somebody's going to resign. This had happened in the past, especially on the side of Iranian negotiators, including Ali Larijani or Javad Larijani. Which one was Ali Larijani? He quit. I mean, because he reached an agreement. He went back. Iranians didn't accept the agreement, so he quit. But this time, Javad Zarif stayed there. I think his only problem was not dealing with the Americans, but was also going back and checking things back home with Iranian leadership. There was definitely a very strong willingness on the side of Iranians to reach a deal. But the fact that there were two people who were determined to carry on the talks and give diplomacy a chance, I think, made a huge difference this time.
Ali, before I hand it off to you, I just wanted to say one thing in response to Malcolm's question. First is that I think the book that your group did, Malcolm, was, I think, one of the more interesting and informative pieces of literature about U.S.-Iran relations that's come out in the last decade. What was the title again? Becoming Enemies. And I think the importance of it, and it's something which is commonly misunderstood in the U.S., is that from the Iranian perspective, from the Islamic Republic perspective, the thing that has angered them most and created the most resentment among the Iranian leadership was what they perceived as the U.S. support for Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War. And I thought you guys did a brilliant job of shedding light on that history. And I think there's another point which is commonly misunderstood, which is that the United States keeps apologizing for the 1953 coup against Mossadegh. And I tell people if Mohammad Mossadegh were alive today, the Islamic Republic would either throw him in jail or execute him. So he is not someone who we should keep apologizing to Iran's leadership for overthrowing Mossadegh. They were also opposed to Mossadegh. But I think you guys put your finger on it. It's the history of the Iran-Iraq War, which is something not commonly understood for many people here. And then second, I do think, your question was the evolution of U.S. understanding about how decisions are made in Iran. And, one way we can see that evolution is how President Obama has been writing numerous letters to the Supreme Leader. I think he's written 4 or 5 personal letters to the Supreme Leader. And that was unprecedented. Never had a U.S. president reached out to Khamenei directly. And on the contrary, I remember during the Clinton administration, Mohammad Khatami was elected president, and the Clinton administration tried to kind of engage the reformists and strengthen the reformists and weaken those hardline forces in Tehran. So I think that there certainly has been an evolution in the U.S. understanding of of the power structure within Iran. I don't know if there's necessarily been an evolution in our understanding of how decisions are made in Iran. Frankly, I don't think that most Iranians understand how decisions are taken within the country, who's in the room, how those decisions are made. But in terms of the architecture of power in the Islamic Republic, I think there's a much better understanding than there was, say, a decade or so ago. But I'll give Ali the last word.
Thank you very much. Let me talk about the birth rate. I mean, we were talking about, because that's fairly quick. I mean, there was certainly among what we would term, or what we would consider a middle class, there's a reluctance to have more and more children. But, I mean, recently Khamenei has asked people, he wants the population to double in the next 10 or 20 years or whatever it is. So he's encouraging them, and they've withdrawn a lot of assistance to, the free contraceptives and stuff have all been now sort of removed to encourage the population to go. Yeah. So I mean, it's he wants to replenish the resource, I guess, and partly it's the view that we have an aging population, therefore we need a younger population to be able to support. But I mean, I do know that there are many within the more the Ministry of Economics and others who view this with great trepidation, that they're going to suddenly have to find resources for 150 million people rather than 75 or 90, whatever it is. In terms of capacity building, I mean, one of the interesting things is that, as I said, there has been a lost decade. So there is, there's a very well-educated population, but well-educated in what? And the question is, and it goes back also to the economics, when you look at it, I found it very interesting. I mean, I used to go to lots and lots of conferences in the 1990s, and when lots of businesses were discussing, about the prospect of going to Iran. And there was always there a little bit of a sort of a semantic misunderstanding about what people meant in terms of private enterprise investment, this sort of thing. But I think now the problems are even probably bigger in some ways. Partly because that decade has, things have developed in the West, for instance, on lovely topics like compliance and anti-bribery laws and anti-corruption and so on and so forth that we all have to sign very regularly these days. I mean, I think people going to do business in Iran and Iranian businesses coming out to the West will suddenly find that the environment has changed, certainly when they're coming to Europe and the United States. So I think, there are things that need to be done. There is sort of a business education, if I can put it that way, that needs to be built. And I think, to go to your point at the back, I mean, I think for me the problem is if the structures of that economy have not changed substantially, all that will happen is that money will go in, it will flow into the regular areas, and it will be recycled out again in a way. And, you can look at the economy under Khatami when oil was $7 a barrel, and the economy under Ahmadinejad when oil was $60 a barrel and rising. And what happened to that money then? I mean, if you look at rich kids in Tehran, you can see that some of the money went into very interesting places. I actually saw some pictures on websites of the most extraordinary houses being built in Rasht and other places. I mean, I think the Shah would have blushed had he built a house this size. I mean, I kid you not, it's far bigger than Nia Varan, I have to tell you. So there is money. I mean, there's money there, and there's a huge amount of money. But it's a little bit, what gets me is it's a little bit like the sort of the oligarchical mentality in Russia. I mean, there are certain people making lots of money. There are other people that are not, and I think these are fairly well guided. So that is a problem. And but to go back to a previous question, I mean, there are people in Iran who know full well what the problems are. One of the things that they have to do in Iran is to sort out the irrigation in this country. We're running out of water. I mean, it's a catastrophe, I have to tell you. That the Ministry of Agriculture will go and say, actually, we're extracting so much water from the ground, and we're not replenishing it, that, in 20 years' time, we're all going to be dry. So, I mean, these are issues that need to be handled and dealt with very quickly. And Malcolm's right. First of all, very pleased to meet you in person, because so it's very nice to see you. I'm going to be slightly, in the interest of a couple of my students here, actually, I'm going to also be slightly contrarian with you in this. One, I was going to say, I think that the American understanding of Iran has grown in leaps and bounds, but the baseline was low. Yeah, I mean, let's be honest about it. When I started working on this thing, and I written it in my own book, there's this wonderful line of Condoleezza Rice, ringing up and saying, it's probably apocryphal, but it has a certain truth to, how many people in the State Department working on Iran? And the answer came back, one. I mean, this was, and how many people with Persian? And I have a number of friends of mine who are very good Persianists, but would be appointed to desks out in the Caribbean, this sort of thing. I mean, it's a sort of a foreign ministry problem that happens everywhere, by the way. I mean, I'm not saying it's particular to Iran. I think the capacity in the United States has grown exponentially. I mean, I think it's been really fantastic to see how it's grown. In terms of understanding decision-making, however, where I'm going to say is that there's a certain amount of, there is room to grow, if I can put it that way. I don't think anyone necessarily understands precisely how the decision-making is done, principally because, of course, there is a single decision-maker at the back end of it. It's not that we're thinking of Khamenei as some sort of great omnipotent dictator or whatever. I don't think that ever works. But the fact is, in 2009, it was made very clear that he has the last word. And that was always the decision. When it was about the election, nobody debated whether there was fraud or not because he had the last word. He'd spoken, that was it. And I think in this case he has that. So who feeds into that decision-making process or his ideas? It's often difficult, as Karim says, to work out who's actually sitting on this high table and discussing things with him. But I do think, and I'm going to finish off with this because I said for the benefit of my students who are here, just a little bit of nostalgia for them. There's a wonderful, wonderful quote, I have to say, and I'm going to go back before 53, unfortunately, from Lord Curzon. And I know they're going to sigh. And he complains about British policy towards Iran in the 19th century. And he says the trouble with us in our policy towards Iran is we vacillate between the sort of the white heat of excitement and then the sort of the dullness of boredom of disinterest. And I think the problem with Western, and this actually goes to the heart of where my concerns are over this whole nuclear negotiation. And someone put the point out he said these negotiations are like a roller coaster. And they are, And what I'm trying to say, I think, to people is rather than have great big highs and then followed by dramatic lows and the emotional roller coaster that this is dealing with. Let's try and level it a bit and approach it with a slightly more sober, level-headed approach to it all. Because I think the Iranians also, by the way, when they say the Iranians are very good at negotiating, and there are very good chess players in Iran, we know. There are also some very good, Karim says there are very good people who play chicken, and there are very good people who play poker, and and there are good chess, but not everyone's a good chess player in Iran, and I think that cliche is often overused. But one of the things about it, and you'll see this in the cycle of negotiations, is that ability to basically have this sort of emotional roller coaster. And the excitement I see after the Lausanne Declaration is really that after 18 months of no movement at all, when we all thought it was about to fail, suddenly they come out with this dramatic announcement that it's all been a success. And the excitement is palpable. But, the point about that is it's been a very good case of information management in some ways, because when you look at the detail, sometimes things are not as clear as they should be. And I would far prefer that when we approach the other side, the Iranians, or the Iranians approaching the Americans, or the Europeans, obviously, is that we didn't have this roller coaster mentality, that we approached it in a far more sober way. We learned those lessons. We understand what the negotiating tactics of the other side are, and appreciate that really, we can afford to be, perhaps, a little bit more laid back about the approach, about what's going on. I have to say, one of the things I will say, and I'll finish with this, is Zarif has played his hand extremely well. There's no doubt about it. I think he's done a spectacular job, actually. But he's done a spectacular job, really, in turning, as I said somewhere, America has now become the suitor, and Iran can afford to be coy. And that, I have to say, is all credit to him, from a purely objectively diplomatic point of view. But I think it shows that actually from the other side there needs to be a little bit of, we need to, I suppose, adjust our understanding a little bit more and refine it a bit more. There is room for improvement, as I would say.
So I'd like to thank you for your thoughtful questions. Thank you guys for your thoughtful answers. You're around.
Yeah, I'll be around. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So will I see you?
Karim, would you get my bag?
If Iran is good. Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much.